Assalamu alaikum, I'm Mas Patel, and this is a special analysis in a historic turn of events. The Assad regime in Syria has finally fallen. It marks the end of an era that has seen over a decade of conflict and turmoil. The regime, led by Bashar al-Assad, had been a central figure in the Syrian civil war, which resulted in immense human suffering and displacement of millions of people. The power vacuum left by Assad's departure has been swiftly filled by Abu Mohammed al-Golani, the leader of the group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Al-Golani, once a prominent figure in the al-Nusra front, has now positioned himself as a key player in the new political landscape of Syria. His rise to power signals a significant shift in the dynamics of the region, with potential implications for both domestic and international politics. As the world watches closely, the future of Syria remains uncertain. The international community is now faced with the challenge of navigating this new reality, balancing the need for stability with the complexities of dealing with a leader with a controversial past. The coming days and weeks will be crucial in determining the direction Syria will take and the impact this will have on the broader Middle East. So, who are the rebels and why the sudden advance? Lucy Fielder has more.
So who is leading the rebel advance? A group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, launched the campaign. Led by Abu Mohammed al-Golani, HTS was formerly called the Nusra Front and was al-Qaeda's official wing in the Syrian war until it broke ties in 2016. It has long been dominant in Idlib, part of the northwest that stayed under rebel control for the past few years. And it's designated a terrorist group by the United States, Russia and Turkey. Another rebel alliance has launched a separate offensive from areas north of Aleppo. They're backed by Turkey and fight under the banner of an armed opposition group called the Syrian National Army. So why has the conflict flared now? Two supporters of the regime, Iran and Russia, are tied up with other conflicts, regionally and in Ukraine. Iran backed Hezbollah in particular, which helped Assad's forces defeat the rebels in the past, suffered major blows in its conflict with Israel over the past few months, now halted by a ceasefire. Speaking in Turkey, the head of Syria's main opposition abroad, Hadi al-Bahra, said the preparations to seize Aleppo began a year ago, but were delayed by the wars between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And they saw it's not good to have it while there is a war in Lebanon. So the moment there were a ceasefire in Lebanon, they found that the opportunity is good for them to start.
Syria is partitioned into zones with foreign troops on the ground, including the United States and Turkey. A deal between Russia and Turkey has stabilised the situation in the northwest since 2020. Turkey, whose troops are in the northwest, has also expressed growing frustration with Assad's failure to reach a deal with the opposition to end the conflict.
Syrian government forces abandoned the key city of Homs on Saturday after less than a day of fighting, leaving the former president Bashar al-Assad's 24-year rule over the country, with insurgents entering the capital, Damascus. We have this report by Freddie Joyner.
Syrian rebels advanced toward the capital city of Damascus on Saturday as front lines collapsed across the country, posing an existential threat to President Bashar al-Assad's 24-year rule. In a video posted on social media, protesters could be seen tearing down a statue of Assad's father in the suburbs of Damascus, while shouting, quote, "Down with Bashar al-Assad, Syria lives on." Meanwhile, Syrian rebels battled government forces for control of the key city of Homs. Since the rebels' sweep into Aleppo a week ago, government defenses have crumbled at a dizzying speed, putting the Assad dynasty's 5-decade reign over Syria in danger, and the continued influence there of its main regional backer, Iran.
So certainly there is an existential threat against the regime.
Qutaiba Idlibi is the resident senior fellow on Syria at the Atlantic Council.
The regime finds itself isolated, especially because on one hand, Russia is bogged down in Ukraine. But I think also more importantly, on the other hand, Iran is incapable of really responding effectively to protect and defend the regime.
The U.S. and other Western officials said the lightning rebel advance suggests Assad's government could fall within the week. The pace of events has stunned Arab capitals and raised fears of a new wave of regional instability. According to the state news agency, Assad remains in Damascus, and the military said it was reinforcing around the capital and south. The foreign ministers of Russia, Iran, and the main rebels backer, Turkey, said they met in Doha on Saturday and agreed on the importance of Syria's territorial integrity and on restarting a political process. They said in a joint statement along with 5 Arab countries that a political solution was needed to stop military operations and protect civilians in Syria. But there was no indication they agreed on any concrete steps, with the situation inside Syria changing by the hour.
The resurgence of the fighting in Syria has brought into focus the role of foreign powers in the country. Turkey, Iran, Russia and the United States have all deployed troops in Syria since 2011, while Israel mounts frequent airstrikes in Syrian territory. Sean Horgan explains the reasons why.
The resurgence of fighting in Syria has brought into focus the role of foreign powers in the country, with many having deployed troops since 2011. Who are the foreign armies involved in Syria? Turkey has deployed troops across northwestern Syria in support of the 2011 rebel uprising against President Bashar al-Assad. Turkey wants to weaken Syrian Kurdish armed groups which carved out autonomous enclaves along the Turkish border during the civil war. Ankara views the groups as an extension of the Kurdish Workers' Party, which it deems a terrorist group and has been waging an insurgency in Turkey since 1984. It also wants a return home for some 3 million Syrians who have fled to Turkey during the war. Turkey has mounted multiple operations in Syria involving thousands of troops since 2016. Iran deployed its Revolutionary Guards to Syria as early as 2012 to help Assad. Lebanon's Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran, played a big part. For Iran, Assad is a crucial ally, part of its axis of resistance to Israel and US influence in the Middle East. Other Tehran-backed Shiite Islamist groups from Afghanistan and Iraq have also played a vital combat role. Iran's presence in Syria has been a big point of concern for Israel, prompting it to carry out frequent airstrikes. Russian forces have had a presence militarily in Syria since the Cold War, but intervened on Assad's side in 2015. Coordinating with Iran, they operated from an airbase in Latakia province, with Russian air power decisively tilting the conflict Assad's way. On the ground, Russian troops are involved in government-held areas, with military police deployed during attempts to de-escalate fighting. US military intervention in Syria began in 2014 against the Islamic State jihadist group that had declared its rule over a third of Syria and Iraq. Working with the Syrian Democratic Forces, they fought to drive Islamic State from areas it had captured in Syria's north and east. Declaring the battle with Islamic State almost won, President Donald Trump announced in 2018 he wanted to pull out US troops, but the plan was softened after facing criticism for leaving a void that Iran and Russia would fill. Around 9,000 US troops remain in Syria to support the SDF. Assad's government views the US forces as occupied.
Ibrahim al-Asil, an expert with the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., explains why the Syrian conflict is ramping up now after years of a frozen front line. Here's what he had to say.
All the root causes of the Syrian conflict were still there. The regime was weaker than before, and I think that's... During the civil war, Assad didn't win the war, but he prevented everyone else from winning. And I think what's happening today, it's not only that there are external pressure by other armed groups, there is also clear some sort of an implosion inside the regime that's happening. regional powers play a direct and a significant role in this attack. We can definitely highlight the Turkish role in backing different armed groups on the ground, but also there are external players like Russia, which offered Assad huge support, especially 2015 onwards. But today, Russia does not seem to be as interested in supporting Assad the same way they supported him 9 years ago. The war in Lebanon was certainly consequential on the Syrian conflict. Hezbollah intervened in 2013 to support Assad, and they played a significant role. Now, that factor being taken out of the equation, the situation returned somehow to where it was almost 10 years ago, with Assad being on the back foot. But I think another crucial factor of why Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was able to push against the Syrian forces is that they have a goal, which lacks when we talk about the Syrian forces, they lack a clear goal of why they are still fighting this war. And that's why we're witnessing some sort of an alliance also between different armed groups, that they all agree there is a need to topple Bashar al-Assad.
Now, joining us to unpack the fall of the Assad regime is Professor Bill Bowring, a lecturer on human rights and international law at Birkbeck College. We've also got Charles Lawley from the Action for Humanity and Syrian Relief. We've got Walid Safour, the president of the Syrian Human Rights Committee, and Dr. Mohammed Zahid Al-Masri, the CEO of Physicians Across Continents in Turkey. Can I start off with you, Professor Bill Bowring? One cannot be but moved by the scenes that we are seeing on news channels across the globe of ordinary Syrians, some in quite quite enthusiastic embraces with feeling that they've finally been freed. What's your take on what's happened here?
Well, as my much more better informed colleagues will say, this took everybody by surprise. Nobody saw it coming. And nobody saw that it would be so quick, or that Russian intervention did absolutely nothing this time. And this is shown in particular by the Russian response so far, which is that they have very little to say. I was really moved, though, by Al Jazeera from Germany, for example, where people who were young people who were born outside Syria cannot wait to return. And we've already seen masses of people from Turkey, from Lebanon, returning home to Syria or attempting to do so. So predictions, I think, are going to be pretty meaningless, but I think this is very difficult for Turkey and for Russia and for Israel.
Okay, we'll move. Professor, I'll stop you there. We'll move on to the international aspect in a short while. I just want to get immediate reaction in terms of what it means for the Syrian people. I'll move on to Walid Safour. Walid, you are from the Syrian Human Rights Committee. What's your reaction as a Syrian to what's been taking place? Quite momentous scenes. Did you ever think it was possible this would happen?
It was a historical and surprise moment in the history of Syria. After 54 years of dictatorship, and until yesterday, the Russian airplanes dropped bombs on northwest Syria. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe the happiness and the joy among us and among all the Syrian people, especially the displaced people. I was in Turkey and I came just yesterday from Turkey, and the displaced people in northern Syria were dancing because of what happened. It was a surprise to them, and they were so happy for this change in power in Syria, and they hope that everything will go smoothly and quietly to transition to democracy and to justice and to honorable citizenship.
Okay, thank you for that reaction. Can I move to Mohammed Zahid Al-Masri? Mohammed, Okay, we're waiting for Mohammed. Let's go to Charles Lawley, Action for Humanity and Syria Relief. Somebody who's engaged, obviously, with the after effects of this horrific conflict. What will today mean for the millions of Syrian refugees in neighbouring countries and the millions that have fled across the world, most significantly in Germany and also Turkey?
So ultimately, Joy, I think that's the first initial reaction is joy, and no one believed this was possible. No one, but the Syrian people hoped it was possible. They prayed it was possible, and today is 14 years plus of resilience, of determination, of drive. So that's the initial reaction for the displaced Syrians inside and outside of Syria. And as we've seen, there's thousands of Syrians queuing up at the border with Lebanon, hoping to return home, hoping that this day, which many non-Syrians said would never come, has finally come, and it's just a joyous, momentous day. And we can overanalyze, we can add the geopolitics, but for Syrians around the world, this is an incredibly historic day, and we should enjoy what's happening.
Back to you, Professor Bill Bowring. Now, in terms of the international aspect, you mentioned some of the neighbouring countries. Let's just focus on Turkey. You said that this is not good for Turkey, but others are saying that actually Turkey has, in general parlance, played a blinder. They've managed to get rid of the Iranians, get rid of the Assad regime, and secured their southern border with Syria by having their allies take control, and now they can shape what happens and what type of country emerges from the ruins of Assad's deadly dictatorship.
Well, I haven't read anywhere that Turkey exercises influence over HTS. And of course, where Turkey is very much involved, as was mentioned in the clips, was the Kurds. Mm-hmm. And of course, Trump, during his presidency, threw the Kurds under a bus in many ways, but they are still there. And I've seen on Al Jazeera, I've not seen this confirmed yet, that actually HTS is already engaging in combat with the Kurds.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That part of the country.
That's right.
So I think there are massive complications for all of the states which have been involved, none of which saw HTS coming.
That's right. Walid, can I come to you? Did you see this coming? Professor Bowring just made the comment, none of them saw HTS coming. And can you give us a sense of what it is like at the moment on the ground in Syria from the reports, from your reports?
Now, the Syrian scene in all cities and in all villages is rather quiet. And there is strict instructions to all people to be quiet and not to make any harm to any citizen unless they are criminals or they are committed crime, then they will be handed to the authorities.
Yeah.
That's it. And from this point of view, we find that many of the loyal to the ex-Assad regime, they are quiet now and they are living quietly in their homes. Even some of the artists who were loyal to the regime, they now expressing their apologies. Now we are reading their apologies, and the others one, even some military officials who deserted the Syrian, the Assad regime, they are now as well expressing their loyalty to the new move.
Walid, can I just intervene and ask you, Abu Mohammed al-Golani, the new de facto ruler of Syria, he issued a statement where he said there should be no retribution. Is that because of what took place, for example, in Libya and in other for example, in Iraq, where an insurgency began, etc. Is that very important, that there is no retribution, even with those that perhaps were very, very linked with the oppression?
No, we have to learn from the other events, whether in Libya or in Iraq or in Egypt, that there is some groups which want to this move to be failed and to return into chaos. So there are strict instructions to adhere to what should be done to respect all the civilians, and there is no differences because of religion, because of sex, because of any orientation. It was very, very, and therefore I think this is the first move was absolutely successful.
Okay, can I move on to you, Charles? Charles, just give us a sense of how much suffering refugees and ordinary Syrians have had to put up with over the last 14 years.
Unimaginable. When you look at the refugee camps across Lebanon, for example, or the displacement camps inside Idlib, which was accounted for roughly a third of the population of the entire province up until the past few days. Extreme poverty was running rampant, not relative poverty, extreme poverty. Access to water, access to food was very, very low. And we did a report a few years ago, just 4 years ago, as the Syrian conflict entered its 10th year, and found that 99% of IDPs inside northwest Syria were suffering from symptoms prevalent within PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and 75% of refugees in neighbouring countries. So it was, unimaginable. People had seen their homes destroyed, their rights taken away, and living in conditions no one, not even good enough for an animal in some of these camps. And yes, today is finally, we hope, we pray, is the end of this dark chapter where Syrians had their rights, had a decent standard of living taken away purely so this revolution could be suppressed.
Professor Bowring, give us a sense of what the Assad regime was actually about. Obviously, some people will be hearing about terms like Baathism or Arab nationalism. This was a vestige of a post-colonial, perhaps Nasserism, if you will. Give us a sense of all of this. What was all of that? And obviously, the end of the regime means an end to that, perhaps.
We have to go back to the end of the Ottoman Empire, and that part of the world being divided up between France and Britain, basically, with Britain getting Palestine and Jordan and Iraq, and of course France getting Syria and Lebanon. And so Baathism, which you rightly mentioned, that was the pan-Arab movement, which was an anti-colonial movement, with Nasser, of course, as the leading figure. And Assad, his father, was actually an impressive figure in some respects compared with him, and was the last, I would say, of the Baathists. But this now is the final nail in the coffin of Baathism in the region. And I'm sure there will be pan-Arab movements, but they will take very different forms. And I think that's another reason why what is currently happening in Syria with HTS is so dramatic and important, I think, for the whole region.
Okay. Walid Safour, just on that theme, can you tell us how a movement for pan-Arab nationalism, they even united with Egypt at one stage, creating the United Arab Republic, I believe. How did that become such a brutal dictatorship? Give us a sense from your experience.
In fact, since the rule of Nasser of Egypt and the union with Syria, this Arabism brought no more than catastrophe to our peoples in the Arab world. And Baathist while adhere the slogan of freedom, socialism, and cooperation with the others, they bring no more than poverty to the Syrian people, and the rule of dictatorship. Under that, no voice is above the voice of the battle, and they launch no battle but against the Syrian people. They make it impoverished, poor, and baseless. And as you see now in the 13 years of war against it, and which make half of the Syrian people displaced and refugees in neighboring countries and across the world. This is the slogans of Arabism, and all regimes that adhere to this slogans brought no more than catastrophe and many harm to their peoples.
We've just got Dr. Mohammed Zahid al-Masri from Physicians Across Continents. Welcome to the show, Dr. al-Masri. I believe you are in the region. Can you tell us where you are and a sense of what's taking place around you?
Yes, my organization, Physicians Across Continents, is working in the north with Syria since 2012. And our team are still there, working there, and they moved to Aleppo and Hama during the last few days with the extension of the fighting. And actually, we are actually following the situation in relation to the humanitarian situation of the new areas that was included and become outside the control of the Assad regime.
And how have people reacted to where you are at this incredible news that this system that's been in place, this dictatorship, and we're talking about Baathism, and for 54, I believe 50 plus years at least, has fallen so dramatically within a week?
All Syrians today are euphoric about the new situation. They are really happy about removing this dictator regime and starting, actually, they think that they will have the normal life like other peoples on this earth. Actually, I have to say that the most emotional part is when you are releasing the detainees, that they are still there for the last sometimes 30 years. Some of them, they thought that the Assad father is still there. They don't know that Bashar is the new president.
Sure.
Some of them, they are asking us, are you following Saddam Hussein? Is Saddam Hussein is coming to help us? So people in this, the detainees are actually they are dead inside these, that these security centers for 20 and 30, and some of them for 40 years. You know that today they released one pilot who refused in 1982 to respond to the orders to attack Hama.
Yes.
And he's there since 1982. You imagine the situation. So people are really happy. Everybody is happy. Not only, not only that it is not related to one religious sect or to one ethnic group. All Syrians are happy that they removed Assad regime now.
Professor Bowring, how did the Ba'athist regime or Ba'athist ideology become such an oppressive system in Syria? How did that happen from being a liberation movement, supposedly, for Arabs against colonialism? You called it an anti-colonial movement. How did that transition happen?
I think one would need to be a psychologist as well as a historian as to why leaders turn into monsters. And in particular with Saddam Hussein. I think Nasser, of course, was a hero, in particular with the war with Britain and France. But that was back in 1956, so we're talking about a very long time ago. And Assad Sr., I think, was a monster from pretty early on. And I have to say, I was in Damascus twice, a second time, with the Arab Lawyers Union, sitting very close to Assad Jr. making an endless speech, and he was an extremely unimpressive figure, but extremely brutal.
Yes. Okay, well, Walid Safour, we just heard that the prisoners are being released in Syria, some of the worst prisons probably across the world in terms of the torture and the punishment that was taking place. You heard about a pilot from Dr. Masri, who said was released and still thought that Saddam Hussein, well, some still think Saddam Hussein when it was in power, or did not know what took place, or the father Hafiz al-Assad was still in power. Can you tell us about how significant that is for the psyche of Syrians like yourself?
In the 70s of the previous century, a wave of detentions and early 80s as well, and after the Hama massacre in 1982, our committee documented at least 25,000 people who vanished in prisons, especially in Palmyra or Tadmor prison at that time, which was closed in 2001. And detainees moved to Sednaya prison. And there are many secret prisons in Syria and detention centers. The air military, the national security, all of them, they have their own prisons, which is dependent from the others, and people don't know. I heard about a Lebanese detainee who was moved now by a helicopter from Hama to Damascus. And after that, in order that his ID not to be disclosed, they killed the one who was take care of him. And as Mr. Zahid told, we heard about people who don't know their names, about people who were now, they lost their senses and their minds. And we know our committee documented in the past around 62 devices of tortures in Syrian prisons, and about the holes of salt where they put the dead. We
Yes.
heard as well from one of the prisoners that he and 54 they were about to be executed.
Yes.
And they were freed only
saw
half
that
an
clip.
hour before they were executed. The Syrian prisons are hell. We documented now around 100 and around 32,000 people who vanished in prison, and the one who liberated so far, less than 10,000.
Yes.
From Homs and from Sednaya and from Aleppo, from the others, less than 10,000 so far. Where are the others? That means the Syrian, the Assad regime killed at least 100,000 inside the prisons. So this is the situation. It is catastrophic. And we appealed in the past to the international community to look into this and to deter the Syrian regime, the Assad regime, not to kill people, not to. But the Assad regime is still playing on the ropes of his alliance
Yes.
with Russia, with Iran, with the other international power.
Okay.
This is what happened. And now when the facts and the truth are released, there will be
Yes.
many sad stories.
Okay. Thank you for that. Charles Lawley, sorry, I missed you in the last round. I want to ask you, we heard about the first mass killing of Syrians by the Ba'athist Assadist regime was in 1982 in the city of Hama itself, which was liberated earlier this week. However, Syria is a makeup of a lot of different communities and sects. How will they be feeling, those who are not from the majority Sunni sect, which is probably around 70%? For example, the Druze, the Christians and others, like, for example, the Alawis, from whom the Assad regime came and who provided a lot of the secret services, the Shabiha, the private security, the intelligence, the feared intelligence apparatus as well, were run by the Alawis. How does that all work?
Well, I mean, as we've heard in this discussion, like nobody knows what comes next, and I think every Syrian everywhere is apprehensive of what follows this. And as we've seen in throughout the past few days, the opposition armed groups, or now the current armed groups who are now in charge of a revolution, are making concerted efforts to ensure that all religions, all minority groups are represented, and there isn't the violence, the communal violence that many fear. We don't know what comes next. I certainly hope and pray that we do not see any more suffering. The Syrian people of all backgrounds have suffered enough, and we really hope this is a new chapter and the end to conflict in Syria and the start to a democratic Syria for all Syrians, regardless of a religion.
Dr. Al-Masri, tell us about where you are from in Syria. Tell us about what your family are. Give us a personal account of what's taking place right now as we speak, because obviously there must be a lot of conversations taking place.
Yes, I am from Daraa, and I am proud because Daraa is where the revolution started. And I have to say that my family was to leave Syria in 1974, not in 1982. I mean that I spent 40 years of my life outside Syria, and finally in 2012, I was able for the first time to cross the border to the opposition areas. And this is one of the stories of different Syrian families, because you are inheriting the political position of your family, of your father and grandfather. It doesn't mean that you need to be politician to become punished by the Assad regime. And in Daraa now, lucky enough, we're able to actually to take care of their community for the last few years, and finally today they pushed the regime outside. And to be honest, that from the humanitarian point of view, today we have thousands of released detainees. They are in need of complicated medical care, and this is the situation now in our hospitals in all around Syria. And they are asking for all the doctors and all the nurses to come back to the hospitals and try to support them. Thousands of detainees, they are actually they are complicated medical cases because of the suffering for that long time. And I have to say that the Arab nationalism that was used by the regime as an excuse of all this violation is not a reality. And the Syrian community is now, everybody, all Syrians now are advocating for the tolerance, for the coexistence between all different Syrian religious sects and ethnic groups, and to become one community again, and to avoid any conflict in the future. As Charles mentioned, that we are actually really very anxious about the next stage, because we are concerned about also interventions from outside trying to push the situation again to the conflict situation. But I have to say that the military groups who are now moved from Idlib down to Damascus, all of them were committed 100%, and all of them, they actually showed very high level of commitment and to the communities, and people are actually welcoming them, and even in the cities and villages of the minorities. For example, like Musyaf and Salamiya, where we have smaller minority groups, and all of them actually are welcoming. And even in Aleppo, the Christian community of Aleppo, they welcome the military groups, and I mean the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and other groups when they access Aleppo. And everybody actually is happy about actually removing the regime finally after 54 years. Everybody. And everybody is talking about 100% tolerance between different Syrian groups.
And that's really good to hear. But tell us about your family in Syria. What are they saying?
90% of my family are outside Syria.
Okay.
And now we are going back after 40 or more than 40 years. Now it's 50. For me, I was 2 years old. Now I am 53. So it's 51 years now. And I'm trying to go back to Dar'a. And I will visit the remaining part of my family. But to be honest, most of them, after all these years, they are not allowed actually to stay at our home country. And this is because we are considered as part of the opposition for all that time. So it seems that even our families who are still there in Dar'a for the last few years, they are actually in need of continuous support. The financial situation and the economic situation under the control of the regime was very bad, and people actually suffering. And there's no infrastructure, no electricity, there's nothing actually for them. And so this is why most of the people, even people who are not really taking a political position, they want the regime to be removed actually, and they are happy that Assad is not there anymore in Syria.
Walid, can I ask you, because obviously you are Syrian yourself, what's the news from your family?
I am now 74 years old. I left Syria when I was 30 years. And after me, my family was forced to leave one after one. My brothers and my sister was killed by a explosive barrel on her home. And some of my nephews, 13 nephews and grandsons were killed as well at home in their homes in the city of Homs, and we are now looking forward to go back to our country. We are looking for a democracy, for justice, for transitional justice to be applied to Syria, and to bring forward the country into normal life, not despotism, no dictatorship, no differentiation. In the past, for example, one of my brothers, before leaving to Syria, anyone who was working in the department of the regime, especially when he belongs to certain sect,
yes,
he can embezzle him to take his money or cast him in a prison in order to take money. And after that, he paid all his money, and then he followed me. This is the situation in the past, during the past regime. It was very, very, very sad and bad and bitter life, like the people now. Now, for example, the civil servant in Syria, his salary, the best one, is around 15 to 20 US dollar. Which doesn't suffice for his bread for 10 days. This is the situation. People are starving under that regime. However, Syria is good in its agriculture, in its mineral, and it's in petroleum wealth. It is very, very, and it can export a lot of its products to the other countries.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Walid Safour. I'm coming to the end of the program, so I'm going to give a final word to everybody. I'll start with you, Charles. Syria under this Assad, Bashar al-Assad, in the latter years became a narco state, supplying the whole of the Middle East with captagen, and that's how many say it survived. That has finished. What's your hope for what becomes the next iteration of this, as we heard from Walid Safour, this perhaps potential great power?
I think as well as being a narco state, it was a state run on fear, a state run on death, a state run on terror. I remember, so at Syria Relief, we run hundreds and hundreds of schools across northern Syria. And on January 1st, 2020, I'll never forget, we had a school in the city of Samin in rural Idlib, bombed by a cluster munition, banned cluster munition. It was in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing else for it. It was pure, and as the children were leaving school, it was nothing more than regime forces inflicting terror by bombing children at school. The youngest victim was 6 years old, and then at the end of that year, a child was killed scavenging because the poverty was so dear, and they found an unexploded cluster from that thing, and 2 more children were killed. And a Syria where children aren't killed so that people can stay in power is a huge amount of progress from what we've had for the past 14 years and the past 4 or 5 decades.
Thank you, Charles, for that. To you, Professor Bowring, as an academic, I mean, you've obviously seen a lot of other countries going through this. What's the next thing that will happen very quickly?
I'm very encouraged to hear, particularly from Walid and from others, that people in Syria are determined to learn the lessons from the Arab Spring and from other attempts, actually, at democracy in the region. And I think this one looks as if it is not only totally unexpected, but actually probably has a chance. So let's hope so.
Okay, and from my 2 Syrian guests, I'll start off with you, Walid. What do you hope for in terms of the immediacy, support from neighbouring countries? What do you want them to do or not do, I suppose?
I hope they will not interfere in the Syrian affairs, and to help Syria to heal and not to use the current situation in order to destroy and to interfere in...
Okay, thank you so much. And to you, final word to you, Dr. Masri. You're working in Turkey. Do you think the millions of Syrian refugees in Turkey will now go back home?
Absolutely. Everybody will go back home, and even expats in Europe and North America will go back to Syria and try now to participate in the recovery stage. So all of us will go back to our country.
Okay. Can I thank all of you for joining us at such a short notice on what has been an absolutely momentous week for Syrians and for the region, but today certainly is a day where many will share in the joy of ordinary Syrians to finally see their country achieve a goal set so many years ago. Thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.